from the Ticats Audio Network, this is the CFL This Week with Bubba O'Neil.
The 18-game, 21-week preliminary round is over and the 3-week, 4-game elimination is set to begin. And while 6 teams seek good fortune with a Grey Cup victory, what do the other franchises need to fix? This is the CFL This Week on the Ticats Audio Network. I'm Bubba O'Neil. Well, the excitement of sudden death football is here, and joining me to discuss is I would say, an outstanding crew. The Sportsnet 960 in Calgary, please say hello to Pat Steinberg.
How we doing, boys?
What's up, mister? Next up, he's the pilot of his very own show on Sports 1440, and of course, you can see him on YouTube. Jason Gregor, pleased to have you.
How's it going, fellas?
And he's one of our longest and best friends on the Ticats Audio Network from TSN 1050 in the T-Dot, Matt Cauz. You are the man.
I don't feel like the man. Jason's got the best set. Pat's got a great microphone. And I'm the fool with Halloween decorations behind me, but it's great to be here.
Great to have you. All right, guys, let's chop it up real quick. Blue Bombers beat the Alouettes 28-27 in Molson Percival Stadium over the weekend. I'm going to ask you, Pat, was this the wildest finish to a game that you've ever seen? And if not, what was?
Well, I mean, definitely this season it has to be the wildest finish. I mean, I gotta say we've had a few Grey Cups the last couple of years that have had pretty crazy finishes. I mean, if you take a look at Chad Kelly coming in a couple of years ago and shocking everybody and knocking off the Bombers' opportunity to three-peat a couple of years ago, or Montreal putting together that crazy last drive, and so those two, just based on the stakes, I might have to put near the very top. But this season, with the way that punt went and with the way that the wind took over for Montreal and forced that awful punt and allowed Sergio Castillo to be in a spot to drill that game winner, and the fact that it ended up being what it meant, and the fact that it allowed Winnipeg to clinch the West the way it did. I mean, it was definitely the number one this year that would have to be at the very top when it comes to crazy finishes that I've ever seen. Maybe not, and maybe it's just the stakes of those last two Grey Cup games that might put them a little higher. But it was definitely a crazy way to finish it off. It's too bad because it made that final game of the regular season meaningless between Calgary and Saskatchewan. But it was a pretty crazy finish, boys.
Jason, I love the fact that Dwayne Ford on the broadcast said that God must be a Blue Bombers fan.
Well, it was strange how the win just came out of nowhere, really, at that exact moment in time. So that was quite strange. So I would definitely say it was crazy and a little bit odd. As far as all time, no, the one that stands out to me is still the Milt Stegall miracle in Edmonton in July of 2006, when last play of the game, the Eskimos then decide not to go and prevent defense, and he beats them over the top for a 100-yard reception on the last play of the game. Like, are you kidding me? I remember sitting there and at that point, you come down on the sidelines, you watch it from the press box, and then with 5 minutes left, you walk down on the sidelines. So I'm standing on the sidelines watching it, and you're just like, what the bleep just happened here? That was that was one of the craziest finishes to a game that I can ever recall. And, Milt Stegall's talked about it many times that, he's just like, he couldn't believe that he was open downfield and that they didn't sit back and that they rushed 4 or 5 guys and didn't have a safety over the top. It was crazy.
Yeah, the Chris Cuthbert call for that will always be iconic. Causey?
A couple thoughts. I've just got texts from everyone in Regina. They want to debate what affiliation God has in the CFL. They would like to propose a different team. I can't believe you guys haven't mentioned this, maybe so that I get all the wrath from Saskatchewan. But crazy ending to a game, a Grey Cup. Why don't we go back to 2009? 13th man on the field. It's like, hey, look at that. Duval missed the field goal. The Roughriders won this. Wait, why are all those flags? Oh, no. 13 men re-kick. Montreal wins the Grey Cup. This beautiful Cinderella upset is no more. So I'm going to go with that one.
It's interesting too, because everything there that you guys named was all sort of human related, where this was like a natural cause that just caused mania in Montreal. It was crazy. And Pat, you're so right. The fact that there was stakes on the line here, like the Bombers. Even, I mean, let's be honest. I don't know how much emotional stock that the Bombers actually had into this. I would think that it was a big deal to them because they were more than prepared to lose because Castillo had missed that 61-yarder. I thought they had kind of packed it in there, and the fact that they got a second life was unbelievable.
Yeah, well, and on top of that, they also knocked off the team that beat them last year in the Grey Cup, which I think still has a little bit of sway too. It's funny because you're right, like that was the way the whole sequence that led to the Sergio Castillo game winner and all that went into it was pretty crazy. And I just wanted to add on to Matt's recommendation as well. I will never forget being on the sidelines at McMahon Stadium here in Calgary that day for the 13th man, and you know all of what went into that comeback and the Riders and their huge lead, and then Anthony Calvillo mounting that comeback, and you're right, I was on the sidelines in the opposite end zone, and all I saw was the ball go wide, and then I thought it was like people celebrating, and then I'm like, hold on a second, were those flags? And then obviously we know what happened, and the best part about that, Matt, was all game right in front of me in my press box seat. There was a guy running up and down the stairs with a 13th man jersey, and it was very, very annoying. And he kept on blocking my view. And funny enough, the 13th man ended up being what lost him the Grey Cup.
And one other thought, I feel so bad for the press box wherever the Saskatchewan coaches were. That press box took a beating, before the game-winning field goal as well. It was a shame, and only 2 weeks left to retirement, and it got destroyed.
It was a lot of police, was it not, that was throwing down?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you know what? Just on that one, because it really was, the fact that it was a Grey Cup, we'll never forget it. I would think at that time, guys, just correct me if we're wrong. Jason, you're in Edmonton. Pat, you're in Calgary. Toronto for Matt. Was everyone kind of cheering against the Riders to win?
No, I don't think so.
Toronto? I don't want Montreal.
No?
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
And honestly, I think, Saskatchewan, they were the lovable loser for such a long time as an organization. I think there was a lot of fans who were kind of like, you know what? I don't mind the Riders because they were never really a team that you had to worry about, right? They never win. Now, then they got on a run there where they won a few Grey Cups, and then suddenly everyone's like, hey, screw you. You've won enough. Well, now I don't like you. I don't care about your watermelons or anything else anymore. But I don't know if in 2009 they had reached that level yet. But there was definitely, there's a percentage of every fan base of certain fans that are probably annoying even to their own fan base, but they become really annoying to other fans, right? And those fans definitely heard about it because, they talk a little trash, which is great, but in the age of social media now, and 2009, it was still kind of in the infancy with Twitter and stuff. Like if that would have happened in 2013, you would have had you would have needed more mental health intervention in Saskatchewan than ever before because they would have just been reading it nonstop, and there would be other fans I think now that would be relentless. But I don't recall at the time it was being that much. I'm sure there's some that are like, I never cheer for the other teams, but sometimes you get West teams are like, well, I guess I'll kind of cheer for the West over the East. It kind of varies depending on the year. Edmonton and Calgary, I don't think ever really cheer for each other in a Grey Cup, and I think it's probably now graduated into Saskatchewan as well as being the team. But for a while there, I found they never really used to cheer against, especially Saskatchewan, because they were never in it and they were really never a contender.
Good point. All right, guys, this was interesting to me in the final week of the regular season. The fact that Elks quarterback Trey Ford, Stampeders quarterback Jake Maier, both of them who've been had kind of up and down seasons all season long for many different reasons. They were outstanding in their season finales. Jason, which QB right now, when you're looking forward to 2025, do you think will be a better fit to build around?
Well, Trey Ford's been great all year except one game against the best defense in the league. And to me, it's absolutely asinine and ridiculous that the Elks management and coaches kept pushing out we're going with the more consistent quarterback. What the hell are you talking about? Like, more consistent in losing games? Yeah, 100%. That was Bethel Thompson. All you got to do is look at the record. When Trey Ford starts, the Elks are actually a competitive team the last 2 seasons. You know what? When he doesn't start, they're an unmitigated disaster. And that's just a fact. So now you can look and say, well, geez, Trey Ford isn't a perfect stand-in-the-pocket passer. Who cares? I don't want him to be. Warren Moon wasn't that early on in his career. I'm not saying he's Warren Moon, but Warren Moon talked about how early in his career in Edmonton, he was better at throwing on the run. So they built the offense around him throwing on the run. And he learned to become a better pocket passer, obviously became one of the best quarterbacks, the NFL and the CFL has ever seen. Trey Ford, if you watch that play, and that I think symbolizes what Ford can do, is when he's in the game, the Elks can run the ball way better because the defenses, they can't just say, you know what, we're all gonna pack the house, because the minute he fakes a handoff, now he runs outside for 25 yards every time. And last game against Toronto, they specifically had a play where the rush end lined up outside to prevent Trey Ford from scrambling. And you know what he did? Because he's maybe the fastest guy in the league. He just ran around him and then tossed it downfield. Trey Ford is the most exciting quarterback they've had in Edmonton in a long time. And all he does is win games. That's all he does. He had 10 touchdown passes this year. You look at how many games they rush for 100-plus yards, 200-plus yards as a team when he's in the game. And this management crew, it wasn't just Chris Jones, because after he left, the same guys, Simon and Jackson, kept talking about, well, we're not sure about Trey Ford. So the biggest decision the Elks have is to hire a president who's going to hire a GM, who I don't think is G. Roy Simon. Because if G. Roy Simon's a GM, I don't think Trey Ford comes back. Why would he? They've shown actions speak louder than words, guys. And they've shown they don't have any faith in this guy, despite all he does is win and make them a competitive team. They're not great. They have other issues, and he's not a perfect quarterback. But the numbers don't lie. All you got to do is, what are quarterbacks based on? Wins? Look at his yards per reception in completion compared to Bethel Thompson. So if Bethel Thompson's such a better passing quarterback, why does he average 2 yards less per completion? And he can't run the ball. He's no threat to run the ball. And Trey Ford doesn't run the ball that often, but when he does, he's really good at it. So to me, it's Trey Ford, because I think he's a more dynamic athlete and offers way more as a CFL quarterback.
Pat, interesting news this week with the fact that the Stampeders have announced that Dave Dickinson will return as the head coach and general manager. So I've always thought, he made that selection to rid themselves of Bo Levi Mitchell, who, what kind of season he had this year with the Ticats, and go with Jake Maier. And then Jake Maier balls it out on the final game of the regular season. Say what you will about it being the regular season game, but it's kind of like, well, that's the Jake Maier that we kind of expected to see.
Well, and here's the problem. And first thing I'll say is I agree wholeheartedly with Jay. Like if I'm choosing between Jake Maier and Trey Ford to build my team around, and it's one of the two, I'm leaning Trey all day, every day. And the other thing that I'll say is that I think if I'm Trey going into free agency for the first time with a lot of swag and a little bit of just a little bit of leverage, I'm going to the Elks and saying, if you want me, you got to give me some sort of guarantee that I'm going to be the starter. Because 2 years ago, okay, we got it, and we understood that maybe at the time it wasn't a strange Chris Jones thing. Like, okay, he still didn't have a lot of experience at the time, and then he was the catalyst to a turnaround after a winless start, and they end up missing the playoffs, and it felt so strange when Jones went out and signed McLeod Bethel Thompson to that big contract in free agency, because you're like, I thought they had their guy, and so I would have taken that as a slight if I'm Trey, and now this time, after he was the catalyst to a turnaround a second straight year, I'm saying, okay, if you want me back, if you don't want me going to Calgary, if you don't want me going somewhere else, you got to give me some sort of guarantee that I'm going to be the starter. And so I think in this market here, down the highway in Calgary, I think that they are very much in the market for a quarterback, regardless of what Jake Maier did in his season finale. Because unlike Ford, Maier wasn't the guy this year, and Maier wasn't the catalyst to a turnaround, and Maier wasn't the guy that you could count on, and you can't throw really good numbers against the wall and say, look what Jake Maier did. He struggled mightily, guys, and on two different occasions, they went in different directions. When games still mattered, they were going with Bonner. And then they brought in Matt Schultz, and he got the start. And it was honestly because PJ Walker decided that he wasn't going to play. That's really the reason why Maier started the season finale in a meaningless game. They were like, okay, well, let's give Jake one more try here. So look, Jake Maier struggled airing the ball out. He struggled in making it so that plays were dangerous. He got a little bit better in the red zone than he was the year before, but he just has shown in 2 years that he's not a dynamic quarterback. And boy, the Bo Levi Mitchell decision looks even worse, knowing what Bo did in your neck of the woods, Bubs. And so I guess the question becomes, do the Stampeders have a better option? Does Trey Ford become a free agent? Do they go and make some sort of blockbuster trade with BC and bring in Vernon Adams Jr. or something like that? That if the Stampeders can find a better option, I A, think they should take it, and B, I think Dave Dickinson will take it, because as much as he's back as head coach and GM for 2025, we're talking about a guy who all of a sudden isn't as on stable ground as the head coach and GM as he has been over the last almost decade here. So I don't think there's any doubt, Matt, that if I'm looking at one of those two guys, I'm going Trey Ford as a guy I'd like to build my team around compared to Jake Maier, who has generally struggled in 2 years as a starter, which is too bad, because when he took over in 2022 for Bo Levi Mitchell, boy, I remember that game. He went shot for shot with Zach Caleros in Winnipeg, and you're like, boy, maybe the Stampeders have something here, but it just hasn't gone that way.
No, and hate to do Bubs the clean sweep, but I'm going to. If Calgary and Edmonton, we're talking about switching quarterbacks, Calgary would be more excited to get Trey Ford than Edmonton would to get Jake Maier. Also with Jake Maier, good for him for always being healthy and being durable and being available. That's important. But when you look at his passing yards, how much of that is empty calorie? How much of that is he's always there? Eventually, you're going to put up the numbers. He also has 29 interceptions in the last 2 years. That's a concern. The upside is far higher on Trey Ford, and he doesn't run as much as people think, as to Jason's point, but he averages 9 yards a carry. So, it is, of course, Trey Ford. And one final thing, shame on you, Pat. Shame on you, Jason. And shame on you, Bubba. Because none of you talked about Nick Arbuckle having almost 400 yards passing. Shame on all of you for ignoring what the Argonauts' backup quarterback did in that 1-point loss to Edmonton.
Their backup quarterback.
Okay, yeah, maybe backup to the backup. But there he was. There he was.
Well, Matt, can you imagine then if there's a world where Calgary throws a whack of money at Trey Ford? Can you imagine what that madness, if that happened?
That'd be great. That would be fantastic, because now you've got interprovincial, that's not a real word, interprovince just battling and fighting and anger. And if Trey Ford goes there every time Calgary's playing Edmonton, it's a revenge game. It's a delight. No, I would love to see that. And I mean, I think Jake Maier is a overqualified backup, an underqualified starter, and I think everyone should go out and get Trey Ford. But I am going to be biased. I love his story. Coming from Waterloo, closer to this neck of the woods. So I'm rooting for it, but I think Trey Ford deserves the chance to be the full-time starter, because, as Jason said, your running backs run better when the ball's being hiked to Trey Ford than it is to McLeod Bethel-Thompson.
Jason, is MBT, is he on a 2-year deal, or is it a one, or is this it?
No, he's a free agent. Okay. Yeah, and you know what? He'll have some interest. He's a competent quarterback. There was times I didn't love the play calling in Edmonton, regardless of who the quarterback was, especially like their play calling, whatever if their 10 or 15 first plays are scripted, then they should burn that script, because their first quarters there for a stretch was horrific. And it was constantly with Bethel Thompson running on first down. They're not getting any ground, so now it's second and long way too often. And so I don't always blame the quarterback for that. But he's still a competent quarterback. He's just not Trey Ford. He can't. Trey Ford can pass equally well. Look at his completion percentage. But then he throws in the fact of the running and the scrambling. And when your O-line breaks down, because every O-line eventually breaks down, he can extend plays with his legs. And if you watch, his touch on the ball has really improved a lot. And so to me, like the era of Larry Thompson as the owner officially began yesterday. They had their end of the season. Everything's cleaned out now. Rick LaLacheur is there as the interim president. They've talked about how they want to get a president. I thought they were going to get it done before the end of October. Now they're saying hopefully before the Grey Cup, which means, guys, we're 2 weeks, because you know how the CFL likes an embargo. They don't like other big announcements during CFL week. So you got basically 2 weeks to get that done. I know they've interviewed some guys already. And to me, I think this is a huge hire, because their last few presidents has been awful. Preston was terrible. Victor Cui was a fraud, and was inexperienced in running a CFL team, and it was proven to be true. So you've got to have that, and then they've got to hire a GM who. And I'm a big believer in Edmonton that they need somebody. If it's not the GM, then it has to be the president who lives here year round. They've got a long road ahead of them to reestablish the connection with their fans. I think if you watch this year, like my son's 10 now, and he likes going to the games. We sat in the crowd for, I think, 7 of the 9 home games. And I'm telling you, people around, like early in the year, like all the people like, where's Trey Ford? Because Trey Ford ended last year. They were 0-8. They were terrible. Trey Ford starts. They're 4-6. He's exciting as hell. He's a young quarterback in his second year. And you're like, all right. So when they signed Bethel Thompson, I was like, okay, if you sign him to be the backup and pay him backup money to help Trey Ford, that's a good sign, because veteran guys can help you. But no, Trey Ford lost his starting job in the offseason. He didn't even get a chance. He never, from day one, they were basically like, no, he's not a starter. And all these reasons that were bogus reasons, when every time I asked them, can you explain to me where he's not consistent? Well, I don't want to go into that. Well, because you don't have an answer, right? Because he wasn't inconsistent. All you got to do is look at the numbers. So to me, Larry Thompson, as an owner, and with Rick LaLacheur, this is a massive next month for these guys. Because if they don't get the president and the GM right, guys, where are they going to go? Because you need good players to win. And Trey Ford is a really good player. And you've got to do everything you can to ensure that he's your quarterback and you move forward with him. If you want to get a good veteran as a backup, I'm all for that. But it's not a backup that's going to push him. You let him be the starter. And that game against Winnipeg, yeah, he struggled. Great. So give him a chance to go right back out there. What did you do? You went to the Bethel Thompson, who went for a grand total of 27 passing yards in their first 7 series, guys, and they were down 35-3 at halftime. Oh, what a great opportunity. Like last year, I'm going to say this. It was a wasted year of development for Trey Ford. He played up until the final 2 games of the season. He had fewer passing attempts than he'd had as a rookie. What the hell were they doing?
Just one thing, Matt, because you kind of walked me down this road. I got to finish up on this with Trey. You talked about Jake Maier and his ability to be on the field. Is that a concern to you guys? Pat, we'll start with you about Trey Ford and his durability, though, as a starting quarterback.
Not yet. And I know, I think 5 full appearances or close to full appearances this year for Trey. And I think I really do wonder where the season goes for Edmonton if Trey doesn't get hurt early on after getting his opportunity. I also wonder where it might have gone had they given him an opportunity far earlier. But if he doesn't get hurt early on, I wonder about that. But I'm not yet ready because yes, he did have some issues and did have an injury that he had to work through this year, but I'm not worried about that yet. And so for me, I can't really echo what Jason's saying more. Like I just, what more if you're are the Elks, and whoever the new president is, and whether it's G-Roy or somebody else as the new GM, like, what more does this guy have to show you? They used a first-round pick on him. They've developed him. He's been a good teammate for 2 years, and all he's shown you is that he can do the job. He knows the offense. He knows the city. He knows the team. And so if you're Edmonton, you're like, okay, well, I guess you can go try and find somebody else to be a quarterback and get you back to the playoffs. But or you could have this guy that you have in your backyard that you drafted and developed and has shown nothing but the ability to win football games for you. It would be hard to comprehend Edmonton not doing everything it took to keep Ford in the fold. And so now I really, maybe you get a veteran guy as a stopgap if it proves to be there are durability issues. But right now, I'm not worried about that, and definitely not worried about it enough to say Edmonton shouldn't go down the road of keeping Ford in the fold. It would almost be even dumber than going out and getting McLeod Bethel Thompson and paying him what they did last offseason if they didn't do what it took to keep Trey in the fold this time around.
Tiger Cats finished the season winning 5 of their last 7 games. Matt, are they back on track to being a contender in 2025?
No. Now let me explain. I did the dramatic pause there. They were, I'll start this way. I tell you that a team got a quarterback who played every game, and the quarterback had 1,000 more yards than any other quarterback in the league, and he had 8 more touchdown passes than anyone else, and the team was 4 games under 500. That makes me wonder what else is going wrong. They were dead last in points allowed. You had the benefit of Bo Levi Mitchell, and maybe he had a lot of turnovers as well. That has to be factored in. But unless they play Toronto 18 times, then I am not ready to believe that the Tiger Cats are back, because you got the one thing everyone wants: healthy, productive quarterback play. And they finished with 7 wins.
Jason.
It's a strong point. Their defense, I look and say, okay, if Bo Levi Mitchell clearly isn't over the hill, he looked like when he's healthy, he can still be a pretty dominant quarterback. Yeah, there's a propensity through a few too many picks, definitely early on in the season. But their defense was a tire fire, right, early on. Now, Chris Jones as a defensive coordinator, to me, he's great. He's not a GM and coach. I don't think anybody should be a GM and coach. And we kind of slid by it. But Dave Dickinson coming back in both roles, what the hell's going on? That's a terrible decision. You can't do both. You can't do both and have success. We just saw, who are the 2 teams in the West who missed the playoffs? Oh, the 2 teams who had a coach and GM is the same guy to start the season. I don't get it. But if Jones is just a DC or even just a head coach with the right GM, I still think he can help your team. So if Jones is there in the offseason and he sticks around in Hamilton, I think that can help their defense come back. And their defense doesn't have to be dominant. It just can't be at the bottom of the league, like Matt said, because I think Bo Levi's shown you, and with their offensive weapons around, they can still put up points. If they could limit their point totals, then they should be at least to be a competitive team, right? Because all they got to do, guys, is win 2 or 3 more games near a playoff team. It's not like they're going from consistently 4, 5 wins like the Elks. Like the Elks got a big room to go. Hamilton, only got 2 or 3 wins to go.
There is some truth to that. And Pat, I mean, normally 7 wins in the East gets you a playoff spot. And this was kind of a different year in the East.
Good for the East. Good for the East. Yeah.
There's no doubt the standard has been raised in the East. And I don't know who, I'm not giving credit to the Argonauts for that, but regardless, it is interesting to say what Jason talked about there. There is no doubt, at least from my homer standpoint, that yes, the defense was incredibly improved when Chris Jones stepped in. I mean, with all due respect to Mark Washington, it wasn't even close. And all of a sudden, the Tiger Cats look like a different team. And because the defense was better, somehow special teams benefited, and no doubt the offense, because they weren't trying to catch up down by 14 points in the first quarter every game. They actually dictated games. It was fun to see.
Yeah, and I mean, look, and Chris Jones has been a successful DC everywhere he's gone. Every time he hasn't been and honestly, we've even seen him be a successful head coach in this league. I mean, he did nice work turning things around in Sask, and his first trip in Edmonton obviously was very successful and ended with a championship before he went to Regina. So, like, every time he hasn't held the dual role, it's been generally successful, and he's been a very successful defensive coordinator in this league, and I don't expect that to change if it remains with the Tiger Cats. And yes, that defensive turnaround was huge, and during that run of Hamilton dominance where they appeared in a couple of Grey Cups in a row and lost those 2 games to Winnipeg, one of the calling cards was how good they were defensively, and you took a look, especially in that defensive backfield. It was just a cavalcade of stars. And so I guess where I come in on the Tiger Cats is if Chris Jones is back and if that defense can hit the ground running as it ended the season, I think that they can be in good shape. And I guess, and I wrote about this over at CFL.ca, I do wonder a little bit about maybe things being a little more settled in Hamilton going into the 25 season compared to the last 2, because I think 0-5 and 0-3 is how they've gotten off to the last 2 seasons. Yeah. And 2 years ago, you had, a team that's adjusting to a blockbuster offseason trade, and Bo Levi Mitchell's learning a new offense, and obviously the injuries and all of it. It was a disaster in 23 for Bo. And then this year you've got Scott Milanovic, who's learning and getting his message across and all of what goes into that. And so kind of put themselves behind the 8 ball. They had to battle to make the playoffs in 2023. They get 7 wins this year and miss. But with Bo back and the season that he just had, with Milanovic back for year 2, I just wonder if it's a little less tumultuous to start a season in the Hammer this coming season in 2025, if maybe they're in a better spot to hit the ground running, and thus maybe they don't find themselves behind the 8 ball and digging out of a hole early on like they have the last couple of years. So I guess I'm a little more optimistic than you, Matt, about where they are, and that's coming from a 2,000 kilometer view. But I just wonder if maybe them having a little bit more stability to start 2025 could do them a lot of good.
Yeah, obviously it could, but they went out and grabbed a couple of the best defenders on Toronto in last offseason, and it didn't help. And, their 3 wins over Toronto were by 3 points or less. I want to believe Hamilton's can be better, but also look at Drew Brown, really good year in Ottawa. Montreal, the class that they are. The Argonauts didn't have Chad Kelly for the first 9 games, and they're hosting a playoff game. The East is better, which means you don't get to fatten up on those 2 really bad teams. That's been kind of the tradition over the last couple decades here. So I need to see more before I can be optimistic about Hamilton.
Jay?
Yeah, well, I don't have much more to add on Hamilton. I think they can get back in it as long as their defense gets going. I think you can't win with that porous of defense. It's just it sucks the life out of you. You stay on the field too long, then your offense has to push, and that can lead sometimes to feeling like, God, we got to score on this drive, so now we're going to have to take some chances down the field that maybe normally you wouldn't take.
It's pretty much what happened. Pat, just quickly, last thing on this. What was the mood in Calgary? I mean, or was I don't know if it was a topic of conversation or not. Just the fact that, especially in that second half of the season, watching Bo, throw 5 touchdown passes here and 450 yards in one game here. Like, was there any conversation in Calgary about that?
Yeah, there was. There was plenty, especially as they were going through Jake Maier and Bonner and then Schultz and the Stampeders were like, the Stampeders had I don't care if they won a meaningless game to end the season. They were dreadful in the second half of the season, and it was hard to see crowds at McMahon, and it's funny because the Labor Day, the 2 Labor Day games, which Edmonton swept for the first time, and I knew it at the time, now I forget, but they swept it for the first time in however long, and to see the rematch crowd at Commonwealth, and you're like, damn, okay, that's what a good Battle of Alberta when both teams are good looks like. And then to see the declining crowds at McMahon, and there's a lot of different reasons for that, but part of it is the performance on the field. There was plenty of talk about Bo. Bo just had an MOP quality season. He may not win most outstanding player because the Ticats missed the playoffs, but he had an MOP quality season. That's his highest ever passing yards, second highest ever touchdowns, and it's our first 5,000 plus yard passer in the league since Riley did it in Edmonton in 2018. It's just, you look at it from a Calgary standpoint, and people are like, okay, we're struggling here with a quarterback that they thought was going to be the next one, and he can't get it done, and neither of these other guys are doing anything. Then the guy we didn't want to keep just went off for almost 5,500 yards. So yeah, there was plenty of talk about, and Bo is a very popular guy here too. It's not like people were happy to see him go. I think they understood the economics, but people weren't like, oh, get out of here, Bo. Like, Bo's one of the most successful quarterbacks in Stampeders and CFL history. So to see him leave was a tough thing. And then to see 2 years after the fact, the Stampeders have their almost 2-decade run of playoff appearances come to an end, and to see Bo do what he did in Hamilton, yeah, it was tough to swallow for a lot of Stamps fans.
Hey, Bubs, I want to ask you on that note, guys, and I know everyone says, well, he can't win it because they didn't make the playoffs, but who wins it then? Like, who's a clear, obvious, most outstanding player? Because it's not the most valuable. It's who's the most outstanding player. He doesn't play defense. Their defense was terrible. So you look at his passing yards, you look at his touchdowns. Which other player could you look and say, well, I think they have a really strong argument to be considered the MOP? Because it's not most valuable to your team. It's the most outstanding player. Who's better?
I'm not arguing with this because I'm on your side with that. And I know there's a whole lot of Tyrese Beverette talk, but I don't see it. I look at Beverette's numbers, and they're good numbers, but I think that's a good number for a linebacker. I don't think it's MOP stuff. That's just me.
Well, and is it going to be Brady? And I know that, Brady Oliveira didn't.
For the West, there's no doubt. But for the East, I just don't see anyone else in the East.
It's hard for me to disagree, boys. And I'm a little biased. I'm a big Bo guy. But I think the numbers that he put up, I know they don't make the playoffs, but I wouldn't be docking him just because of that. And I think, he ran away with the league passing title. He led the league in touchdowns. He did get them close to the playoffs. And look, Brady Oliveira didn't win it last year, and he had the best running back season in the CFL in a decade. And his numbers are worse this year. Not like he was bad. He was still a great player and was the catalyst of Winnipeg and what they did in the second half of the season. But I feel like it would be a little unfair to dock Bo Levi the opportunity to win a third MOP, or at the very least be in the conversation out east, just because the Ticats missed.
Yeah, and Beverette had a really good year, but he was second on his team in defensive tackles, right? Like Darnell Sankey had 107. So, he's really good. There's two guys right there. It's hard for me to find a reason to not give it to Bo Levi Mitchell just based on the wording of the rule. It doesn't. I get that. If you're not that valuable, you're outstanding if your team doesn't make the playoffs. But in football, you only play on one side of the ball. Well, unless you're a Hunter in college, but you know what I mean.
Matt, you're really quiet.
I'm just listening. There's really not much else to add.
Right.
There isn't that one dominant player. It's going to usually go to a quarterback first. There's a lot of great defenders on Montreal, a lot of great defenders on Toronto. Kadeem Carey, nice year. Maybe Justin Hardy with Ottawa, who's led the East in receiving yards. But, yeah, no, I think I get it. I get it why with Bo Levi Mitchell. I think this is going to be an imperfect year that whoever gets the MOP, we're all going to grumble about it, but we're not going to have an obvious other choice that deserved it. That's it's like when there's a weak year in the Oscars and you look up and you're like, why does Shakespeare in Love win everything? Sometimes there's just weak years for, in this.
It's like Mike Mosley, the kicker. It's like Mike Mosley, the Washington Redskins kicker, winning the NFL MVP.
Yeah, the strike year.
It was very bizarre. Playoffs, guys. Redblacks at Argonauts, Matt. Winner of the East semifinal, and why?
It's going to be Toronto. It's going to be the Argonauts because they are a better team than what their record is. No team lost more players, I believe, in terms of quality in the offseason than Toronto. Then you didn't have Chad Kelly for the first 9 games. I think if we look at what's the single most impressive unit in the CFL, you could argue BC Lions wide receivers, a couple ones out there, Winnipeg running backs, but the Argonauts pass rush. It is special, and it comes at you at waves, and not just at defensive end, but it also comes at you at defensive tackle as well with Hawley. Wynton McManus's numbers would have been better, but he missed like 6-7 games this year. Look what he did in that win against Winnipeg, that 14-11 game. So I think that the Toronto pass rush is the single best thing on the field, and I believe because of that, they get the win. I know Drew Brown had great numbers a couple weeks ago, but Argonauts were up like 38-6. I was at that game, and Ottawa got not 1 but 2 onside kick recoveries. That's something you just don't see. So I think Toronto wins. I'm fascinated about Chad Kelly early. Where's his mental state? How aggressive is he? Because the last time he was in the playoffs, woof, was that a Debbie Downer for everyone in the 4-6 what he did, that 4-pick performance against Montreal. But I got the Argonauts over Ottawa.
Next up, Pat.
I've got Toronto as well. I know Ottawa finally won a football game to wrap up the year, and I know there's been Drew Brown had the great quote and all that type of stuff. But they lost 6 of 8 and 5 of 6 to wrap the year. They beat a non-playoff Hamilton team to wrap up the year. So I'm not convinced that Ottawa all of a sudden has got this wave of momentum going in to take on what I think is a superior football team in Toronto. I mean, look, we're still only one season removed from the, and I know that they got blown out by Montreal in the East Final last year in the game that Matt's talking about. But I mean, that's still a 16-win team in 2023, and who knows where they wouldn't have been, where they would have been rather with their starting quarterback all year. So I think Toronto's the better football team. They're the home team. That, as Matt said, that pass rush has been special this year, which really proves pinball right in a lot of ways. I mean, he let a couple of guys on that defensive front 4 walk to Hamilton in the offseason, and yet Toronto still was able to do what they did. I think Wynton McManus is a special football player and is maybe one of the more underrated players in the entire Canadian Football League. I think we're on a collision course for an East Final rematch. I don't know if Toronto has the ability to knock off Montreal in Montreal, but I do think they've got the ability to beat Ottawa in Ottawa. So I'll go Argos too.
Jay, we're bringing up the Chad Kelly's 4-pick performance in the East Final. We only need to go a couple of months ago where he threw 4 picks in Ottawa.
Well, you look at Ottawa, and there's a few things at play here. Number one, they've been Jekyll and Hyde at home and on the road. At home, they're dominant. On the road, they get pounded. Now, if this is a close game, then I actually favor Ottawa because they've found ways to win lots of games by 2 points, 3 points. And this season series between these two teams was great. What is there, 68 and 69 points in each game? Now, the last time they met, the Argos were up big time, and then Ottawa stormed back and scored 25 points in the fourth quarter to make it look kind of close. And what did Brown have? 400 passing yards, I think he did in that game. So now How much was in garbage time? My gut tells me it's Toronto, but CFL playoffs, man, there's always a few shockers every time that you don't expect them. Ottawa is a team that's got a winning record, but they've been outscored all season long because when they lose big. So I think if this game, the longer it stays close, I think it actually benefits Ottawa. I'm just not sure if they can keep it close.
Matty, the interesting thing is this, we always talk about offense, defense. Let's not forget the special teams here because Devontae Dedmon and Janarian Grant, is there anyone better?
No, it's such a great matchup between those two. The kicking, in terms of special teams, these are two very good special teams units going at it. I kind of call that one a draw. Like I'd rather give a hot take and say this special teams unit's much better than the other, but really that's not the case. So no, this one I think that's going to be a draw. That's going to be fun to watch, especially depending on what the weather is like on Saturday. And again, I must remind everyone, if you have to drive to BMO Field, leave early, like really, 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 really early, because the only thing more devastating than the Argonauts pass rush is the Gardner. It's undefeated. It will destroy you and rob your will to live.
And I'm glad to see that the crowds, increased crowd attendance in Toronto this year, marginally up, and, even almost 21,000 at their last game. And
Yeah.
I think they're going to get a great crowd again for this playoff game. So congratulations to the Argos and their fan base. West, Pat, Lions, Roughriders. This could be a war in this West semifinal. Who wins and why?
I do think we have got a great football game on our hands, and I am really looking forward to it. I lean Sask for a couple of different reasons, because I think it's going to be such a close game. It's funny, we were talking about 13th man, but I'll lean 13th man and Mosaic Stadium and what that can do in a playoff game. Look, I know the Riders have maybe not been the overwhelming, hey, they sell out every game type team over the last number of years, but that's going to be an atmosphere, and that's going to be a really special night or special afternoon in Regina on Saturday. So I think that is a big advantage and something that tips the scales slightly. And I don't love I know BC finishes strong and they get themselves kind of the unofficial playoff bye, just the way the schedule worked. So they get to rest up and be as healthy as you can possibly be at this time of year going into the West semi. I just don't like the unsettled nature of everything BC's going with. It was, it was Vernon Adams. Like we wouldn't be talking about who the MOP is if we were doing this midway through the season, because it was big play VA. He was having himself an incredible year. Then he gets hurt. Then he loses his job inexplicably to Nathan Rourke. And I understand going and bringing the Wonder Kid back. I really do, but I wonder about the timing for the BC Lions, and I don't think it's any coincidence that their season got thrown completely the other way when all of a sudden they added that wrinkle, and then Rourke can't get the job done. And I still think Nathan Rourke's a superstar, but it was a lot to ask for him to come in and get things back on track. And then now they're back to Vernon, and it could very well be VA's last game in BC. I just don't love I don't love the atmosphere and all of what is surrounding BC going into a tough road game. So, those two, I do think they're making the right call going to Vernon, and I think that gives them a better opportunity to win. But the way Sask finished, I know they lose that meaningless game against Calgary, but they win 4 of 5. They feel like a team under Corey Mace that is peaking at the right time. They've got themselves some really, really good players, and I think Sask at home wins a close one. But boy, I'm looking forward to this game, because I think it's going to be an absolute blockbuster. I think we're going to be really entertained by the West semi.
Jason, the crazy thing to me is, it's not even a secret. Like the at least the BC players on offense, when VA played last week, it was unbelievable, the change in body language. Like, they couldn't hide it any longer. And you're right about you had to bring in Nathan. Like, it only made sense. But boy, it's no doubt that whose team that is. So that's why I think this game, all of a sudden, I would have thought Saskatchewan for sure. Now I'm really wondering. What are you thinking?
Yeah, it's tough because, I look at Saskatchewan and, we talk about the importance of quarterbacks. And when they have Trevor Harrison there, they're just, they're a different team as well. And what did they win? 2 of the 6 games when he was out. So, I think that makes a big difference for their team, having him back in. I look at home field advantage, and I always think that can be an advantage. Sometimes that's a deciding factor when I think it's a close game. And you're right that, Vernon Adams played great in his last game. Now, unfortunately, I look at the Lions, and, he didn't play last week. So, it's kind of like you have a bye week. I don't know if that's good or bad, to be honest, for guys. We've seen the number 1 seed struggle sometimes. And I think he's played, 1 game in the last 6 weeks for Vernon Adams. So how much of that is, everybody knows the intensity and the pace picks up come playoff time. So I'm actually going with Saskatchewan just because I think they've been a more consistent team start to finish, especially when they have Harrison at quarterback.
Matt?
Yeah, like the flashy pick would be the BC Lions, and we remember, Justin McInnis putting up 243 yards and a touchdown at the start of the year when Vernon Adams was on a roll and the receivers were on a roll, and it was all good times. But BC, they've been one of the mysteries, and you're right, they had to bring in Nathan Work. You have to do it. It's as simple as that. But I'm going to go with the boring, plodding Roughriders. Trevor Harris, he's won playoff games before. I think that, like players like Milligan, who led the CFL in interceptions, I think he's a big factor in this game. I think that, depending on what the weather is like, that certainly fits Saskatchewan's mold of offense. And nothing against William Steinberg, been a hell of a year for him. But I think that's a big part of it. I think if the game was in BC, I would take the Lions. We saw how great they were in the playoffs in the first round last year, but I'm going to go with the weather, with the outdoors, getting cold, all those sort of cliches. I'll go with the Rough Riders in a very, very close game against the Lions.
Jay, I'm not trying to be conspiracy boy here, but boy, this would really upset the league not having the Lions where the Grey Cup is this year. Your thoughts?
Well, historically, the home team doesn't get in it very often. So, I'm like the least conspiracy theory guy maybe on the planet. So it's probably my biggest pet peeve is because we see, sadly, too many of it talked about now in the world. Not so much in sports, but in other places. But I would, you know what? It's obviously great if you can get the home team in, no question, because the week build-up is even better. But I think this game will ultimately be decided. I think I'd be surprised if it's a blowout, right? Both of these games should be close, although I think Toronto has much more of a chance to kind of knock Ottawa, because Ottawa on the road this year has been roadkill for the most part. So I look at Saskatchewan and, Vernon Adams, what you guys said was true about body language. And it's kind of weird because, Nathan Rourke's had a lot of success there too. So, I always, not playing games, guys. Like, you can be on a practice roster in the NFL, and you know what? You can throw, I don't know how many passes you get to throw a week. It sure isn't much. And I think you lose a lot. And I think that staying there too long is not good for anybody. You want to come back and play. And if you play and you try again in a few years, then great. And if not, you can be a starter. Because now Nathan Rourke, we'll see how he goes next year. But what if Nathan Rourke comes in next year, guys, and is just average? I always wonder, did that extended stay in the NFL kind of ruin his mojo? We'll see. I hope not. I don't think it will. But he's definitely looked really rusty since coming back.
$800,000 rusty next year. That's really dangerous stuff there. Pat, the one thing here, we talk about this East MOP stuff, but I know there's a lot of people talking about Roland Milligan. This could be an opportunity for him to showcase his stuff.
Yep, and he's a difference maker. There is no doubt about it. He's turned himself. I mean, I can't remember a year where there are more defensive MOP conversations than what we're having right now. I mean, you've got another forward in Winnipeg that if you really wanted to dig deep into the numbers, he could be put in there. Got Beverett, as you mentioned, and Roland led the league in interceptions. And not just that, you take a look at some of the underlyings and the analytics, like his coverage numbers were off the charts too in his spot. So he's absolutely going to make a difference, and especially with Sask being at home and the weather being a factor. I mean, it's going to be November in Regina, and I do think that plays a little bit of a part in this as well. But yes, Roland Milligan is going to have his hands all over this football game, I think.
And one other point, the BC Lions were last in sacks allowed, I think like 43. So, I mean, keep that in mind. And there is a lot of good defensive players on the Roughriders.
Well, pretty much a clean sweep, guys. Awesome stuff, guys. Really appreciate your time. Again, talking CFL with you guys who are in the know what you're talking about, not afraid to say what you want to say. Always really appreciate that. Well, folks, the season is over for our Tiger Cats, but the content keeps coming on the Tiger Cats Audio Network. Be sure to stay tuned for this show and all the others that will inform if there is any late-breaking news and transactions or signings. I think there's going to be a bunch of them. Matt Cauz, when people want to talk to you, where can they find you?
Best place is Twitter, mcauz56. The Matt Talks Wine and Stuff with Interesting People podcast that supports a lot of farmers in Grimsby and Lincoln and Jordan and Niagara in the bench. And I'm so sorry, Hamilton, that I said you're not back next year. I hope I'm wrong.
You might as well let us know. It's we're the 29th of October. We're getting up on November. $20. I'm walking into LCBO or wherever. Where am I? What am I getting?
Creekside Syrah, Henry of Pelham, Cabrelo, 13th Street Gamay, all like $20 or under, all great values.
I can't wait for the weekend. Jason Gregor, where can we find you, partner? Love your show, by the way. What's going on with McDavid?
Oof. Well, he's getting looked at today. So last night I was told that they don't think it's serious, but what does that mean? Is it a week? Is it, you know what? Who knows? But if it's only a week, that's like 4 games. So that's probably ideal for them.
Is this a slow start, or is someone going to get fired?
Well, I think they've done that enough. So I don't know. Figure out how to score. Stop. You know what? You guys, I don't know if you ever play hockey or not, but when the goalie has a really quick chest, you're not doing a good job as shooters. They have hit the goalie's chest is unreal fast this year against the Oilers. So they got the most shots 5-on-5 and the fewest goals. It's not ideal. They couldn't score in a brothel with $500 right now. It's unfortunate for them. But you can go to sports1440.ca. Is easy for anybody online, of course, on Twitter at Jason Gregor. Or we have my show on YouTube as well, on Oilers Nation YouTube to watch the show.
Hey, by the way, Warren Fogle looks pretty good in a Kings uniform, by the way.
Yeah, Warren Skogel, right? Was he got 3 goals again? Yeah, no. Good.
Pat, where can we find you, partner?
Well, it's done on Flames Radio, the best team in Alberta right now. It's October 29th. I'm very aware of where we are. I had to throw that in. Sportsnet 960 on Twitter at Steinberg 960. Flames Talks the show 4 to 6 in Calgary every day. So that's where you can get me.
Well, it's good to see Huberdeau playing well, right? That was a horrible year for him, I guess, going back. And a lot of pressure on the guy.
A couple weeks ago, you could have said that. It's looks like the same old Jonathan Huberdeau the last few games.
Oh, my.
It's been a little bit of a different story these last 3 losses. So
that's a tough 10.5
maybe things starting to normalize a little bit with a Flames team that got off to a really good start.
Appreciate your time, guys. Hey, folks, enjoy the games. Again, we're here next week with more talking the West Final and the East Final on the CFL This Week. I'm Bubba O'Neil on the Ticats Audio Network.